Hello, today we're going to be learning about all the participles you need to know for GCSE Latin. So let's ask the question, what is a participle? In the simplest possible terms, participles are adjectives that are formed from verbs. This means they're going to have some traits of adjectives and some typical traits from verbs. Just like adjectives, they're going to agree with a noun, and they're going to agree with them in gender, case, and number, which means they'll change their ending to match the gender, case, and number of the noun they are describing. From verbs, they have tense and voice. So participles can be in the perfect tense, the future tense, or the present tense, and they'll have voice, so they will be active or passive. We'll see what all that looks like very, very soon with some examples. So, which participles do you need to know? The first is the present active participle. It's going to end in an NS in the nominative. So here we have the example of portans, and you're going to translate it as ending in ing. So here we have carrying, but equally we could have singing, going, doing, laughing, etc. The second is the perfect passive participle. Our example here is portatus, and we will translate that as having been carried, or just simply carried. The third and final you need to know is the future active participle. Here we have the example of portaturus, and we'll translate that about to carry. So that's a brief overview of the three participle types you need to be aware of. Okay, so we said that participles are adjectives. So let me show you how you can replace many adjectives with a participle so you get a better sense of how they behave. So here we've got a picture of some men, or homines. So we could say that the homines were celeres, or the men were quick, the quick men. But equally, we could describe their action by saying that we have here homines currentes, or running men. And so you've replaced an adjective here with a participle, because it also works like an adjective. Then our second image, we have a juvenes, a young man. A juvenes solus, a lonely young man. Or, if we want to describe his action, we could say he is a juvenes descedens, a young man departing or leaving. So here you have some examples of present participles and how they work like adjectives. The same is true of perfect passive participles. So we've got a maritus in our first image, a husband. You could say he's a maritus pulcher, a handsome husband, or using a participle you could say he is a maritus amatus, a beloved or loved husband, which he certainly seems to be. In our second image, we have a cena, a dinner, and we could say it's a cena optima, an excellent dinner, or equally we could say that the cena is parata, the dinner is prepared, the dinner is ready. And of course, we can use future participles in the same way. So we've got some soci there, some allies, soci audaces, daring or bold allies, or using a participle, soci pugnaturi, allies about to fight. Likewise, in the second image, we have a gladiator fortis, a brave gladiator, or with a participle, a gladiator moriturus, a gladiator about to die. So, using your knowledge of these three types of participles, let's pair up these nouns and participles to describe what's going on in the 6 pictures on the screen. I'm going to ask you here to stop and think, which means pause the video, and take as much time as you need to pair these nouns and participles up and translate those pairs if you're able to. Alright, let's see how you got on with that. So in our first image, we have milites ridentes, laughing soldiers. Do you know what kind of participle that is? It's present active. In the second image, we have a senator loquens, the senator speaking, and again, that is a present active participle. In the third image, we have naves navigaturae, ships about to sail, and that is a future active participle. In the image at the top, we have an urbs capta, a captured city, and that is a perfect passive participle. In the second image, we have a femina scriptura, a woman about to write, and that is a future active participle. Lastly, in the bottom image, we have a hostis vulneratus, a wounded enemy, and that is a perfect passive participle. Well done if you managed to pair those up correctly, and even more well done if you managed to translate as well. So, let's go through the participle types one by one and talk about how they're formed. So, let's start with the present active participle. I have a hint on the side to remember that you're climbing the mountain, because these participles are going to look a lot like the third declension noun mons, montes. So we have porto, portare in the first conjugation. Our present participle will be portans, which will translate to carrying. If you like, you can pause now and try and do the rest with examples of verbs from all the conjugations, or you can just follow along. An example of a second conjugation verb is moneo, monere, which will form its participle like monens, which will mean warning or advising. A third conjugation verb is traho, trahere. It'll form its participle like trahens, which would mean dragging. In the fourth conjugation, we could say venio, venire, which won't be venins because Latin likes to add things in after those I's. It'll be veniens, sort of like with the imperfect that you'd have veniebam instead of venibam. It's just a general pattern with this conjugation. And that'll translate to coming. And our mixed conjugation verbs, we haven't got very many, but one example would be capio, capere. Obviously, just a reminder, they're called mixed because capio looks a lot like venio, but capere, the infinitive, looks more like trahere. So that'll be capiens, which will translate to capturing. Now, if we want to decline them and change their gender, case and number, they're going to follow this general pattern. So as promised, they are very, very similar to your third declension nouns. Obviously, this example uses portans, but you could do the exact same with, let's say, monens. And we go monens, monentem, etc., etc. Masculine and feminine are declined in exactly the same way. And just note the neuter is the same in the nominative and the accusative in both the singular and the plural. So the lesson here is really know your third declension pattern because it's useful for your present active participles. I've left out the vocative because you'd very rarely see it, and if you did, it would be exactly the same as the nominative. Okay, we're going to try and see if you can work with your present active participles now. So you're going to put these participles in the blue box into Latin, paying attention to use the correct gender, case and number. And you're going to translate the participles in the green box, and you can give the case of those and the number if you like. Stop and think, take as much time as you need, and play the video again when you're ready to hear the answers. Alright, let's see how you got on. So dragging here will be trahentibus, because we've made it ablative, plural and masculine. Leading here will be ducentem, because we've made it accusative, singular and feminine. Loving here will be amantium, because we've made it genitive, plural and masculine. Seeing here will be videntia, because it's nominative, plural and neuter. Watch out for those nominative plurals ending in A. And capturing here will be capiente, as it's ablative, singular and feminine. As for the green box, credentibus is from credo credere, so it's believing, and it could be dative or ablative plural in any gender. Vivens here is living, and it'll be nominative singular, again, could be any gender. Facientium is making or doing, from facio facere, and it could be genitive plural and nothing else here. Ambulanti is walking, and it must be dative singular. And fugientem is fleeing, and it is accusative singular. I haven't stated the genders of those in the green box because in many cases it could be more than one gender. Alright, let's move on to our perfect passive participles. So how do you form your perfect passive participles? Well, there's some good news here if you've been studiously learning your vocab. The tip on the side says to remember to always learn all 4 of your principal parts. And as you know, the principal parts are the 4 parts of a verb that will be given to you in a vocab list or a dictionary. The first, porto, is the present tense, I carry. The second, portare, is the present infinitive, to carry. The third, portavi, is the perfect tense, I carried. And then the fourth is your perfect passive participle. So for any verb, in any conjugation, regular or irregular, once you know the 4th principal part, you know the perfect passive participle. And that, of course, translates to having been carried. Some more good news is that you already know the endings that it'll take in different cases also, because it's going to behave like some nouns you're very, very familiar with. So in the masculine, portatus will decline just like the noun servus. Portata, the feminine, will decline just like the noun puella. And portatum, in the neuter, will decline just like the noun bellum. If you need a refresher of those noun endings, just check your PLC. Another piece of advice is if you want to look over irregular or unpredictable principal parts in general, there's a really useful list on page 255 of the textbook. So, let's see how you got on with these perfect passive participles. Exactly the same as we did with the present active. You're going to translate the participles in the blue box correctly into Latin, paying attention to the gender, case and number. And you are going to give the case and number if you can, as well as the meaning of those in the green box. Stop and think, pause the video, take as much time as you need, and play it again when you're ready to hear the answers. Alright, so seen here is going to be visi, which is from the Latin video, videre, vidi, visus, and you've put it correctly into the genitive, singular and feminine. Dragged here will be tracta, which is from the verb traho, trahere, traxi, tractus, and it's in the accusative, plural, and it's neuter. Killed here, well, there's a few verbs we could use, but I've gone with nakato, from nako, nakare, nakavi, nakatus, and it's in the dative, singular, and it's masculine. Believed here will be creditas, from the verb credo, credere, crediti, creditus, and it is in the accusative plural and it's feminine. And finally, attacked here will be oppugnata, from the Latin oppugno, oppugnare, oppugnavi, oppugnatus, and we've put it correctly into the ablative singular feminine. As for those in the green box, ductorum means led, from the verb duco, ducere, duxi, ductus, and it is genitive plural. Positis is placed or put, from the verb pono, ponere, posui, positus, and it could be dative or ablative plural. Relicta, if we understand it as feminine, is in the nominative or ablative singular, and it means abandoned or left behind. Missos, meaning sent, from the verb mitto, mittere, misi, missus, must be in the accusative plural here. And scripta, if we take it as neuter, it's going to mean written, from scribo, scribere, scripsi, scriptus, and it's going to be in the nominative or the accusative plural. Okay, now the final hurdle, let's have a look at our future active participles. So, we're going to go to the same part of the verb as we did last time. So we use our fourth principal part as a starting point. What you want to do is you want to cross off the US, as I've done here, and you add urus, ura, urum. Bear in mind, this does look a little bit similar to your perfect passive participles, so make sure not to get them confused and look for that UR to check if it is actually future active. And that will of course translate to about to carry. So in the masculine we'll get portaturus, and that's going to follow the exact same noun endings as servus. Portatura in the feminine, again will go like puella, and portaturum in the neuter will go just like bellum. Again, if you've learnt your endings in the past, you're all set to do this with very little effort. So let's test your knowledge in the exact same way as we have for the present active and perfect passive participles. Translate the participles in the blue box and give the case and meaning of those in the green box. Stop and think, pause the video and play it again when you're ready to hear the answers. Alright, so about to fight will be pugnaturae, from the Latin pugno, pugnare, pugnavi, pugnatus. About to write will be scripturi, from the Latin scribo, scribere, scripsi, scriptus. About to climb will be ascensuris, from the Latin ascendo, ascendere, ascendi, ascensus. And about to depart will be discessurum, from the Latin discedo, discedere, discessi, discessus. About to capture will be capturis, from the Latin capio, capere, cepi, captus. As for those in the green box, discensuro will be about to go down or descend, and it's going to be dative or ablative singular. Empturai will be about to buy, and if it's feminine and plural, then it must be nominative. Ducturum will be about to lead, from duco, ducere, duxi, ductus, and it must be accusative singular, if indeed it is masculine. Venditura will be about to sell, and it must be nominative or accusative plural if it's neuter. And monituri, from moneo, monere, monui, monitus, must be about to warn or advise, and if it is masculine and plural, then it can only be nominative. If you had trouble with any of those, do go back and re-watch the earlier parts of the video and ensure you revise the endings of servus, puella and bellum if you struggled with the cases. Alright, last thing we're going to do is we're going to see how we can actually translate these participles when we meet them in the context of a longer sentence or piece of Latin, because it's not always as straightforward as you might think. So we're going to do 4 things. We're going to look for the verb, as we always would. We're going to look for the subject. We're going to look for a participle because we know it's here, but in general, if you find a participle in a Latin sentence, you should establish it, and then 4, see what it is describing in the Latin sentence. So, our verb here, let's see if you can find it. Feel free to pause and try and find these things by yourself, or else just follow along with me. So our verb is going to be reliquerunt, perfect tense, third person plural, they left behind or they abandoned. The subject, well, it would be odd if the camp or the weapons were doing the action of the sentence, so let's assume it's the homines, the men. Okay, so our participle here Should be pretty clear, and we know it's going to be present active because I've told you. Discedentes, which means departing. And we need to find out what it describes. So we're going to look at the ending. And remember, the ending might not match perfectly to the ending of the noun it's describing. But here we can see, okay, it's going to be nominative or accusative plural. And it can only possibly describe homines here. So, if we piece that entire sentence together, we get, the men departing the camp left their weapons behind, or abandoned their weapons. One other thing to bear in mind is you have to be a little bit flexible when translating participles, because sometimes it can sound a little bit rigid otherwise. So you could say as they were departing the camp, when they were departing, or as they departed, on departing, or while departing. Bear in mind that there is more than one possible way to translate a sentence containing a participle to make it sound more natural. Let's try a sentence with a perfect passive participle then. So we're going to follow the exact same steps. We've got more than one verb here, but we're looking for a main verb. Not a participle, not an infinitive, just a main verb. So it must be vidit. Perfect tense, third person singular. He or she saw. Our subject is going to be right at the beginning. It's our only nominative noun here. Senex, the old man. So now let's find our participle. Well, it doesn't look maybe like a typical perfect passive participle, but if you know your principal parts really well and know this verb very well, which you should, you'll realize it's iusos, which is ordered or having been ordered. And if you look at that ending, os, you realize, okay, it's going to be accusative plural masculine. That can only possibly describe viros here, the men. So when we put that all together, we get, the old man never saw the men ordered to fight. Again, flexibility in translation is really important. So you could also say, the men who had been ordered to fight, or the men who were ordered to fight, if you felt that that was a better way of bringing across the Latin. Finally, let's look at a sentence with a future active participle. So we have puella cibum emptura amicum salutat. So our verb, only one option here, salutat, he or she greets. Our subject, again, right at the start, is puella, the girl. Our participle, well, we should see the UR in the middle and think immediately it must be future active. So we have emptura, about to buy. And again, this is a case where it's quite easy to see which noun it must be describing, and it's going to have to be describing puella. So, when we put that all together, we get, the girl about to buy food greets her friend. Again, as I've already advised you, it's really important to be flexible with your translation here. So you could say, when she was about to buy food, the girl greets her friend. While she was about to buy, or as she was about to buy. So there isn't a word for when or while or as here, but that sense is given to you already by the participle itself. So, some final thoughts and advice. Be flexible when you're translating participles. Remember that you can alter things as I've shown you with the examples of the sentences to make it make more sense. Obviously, that's not an excuse to go too far away from the Latin, but having a word like when or while or as often makes it sound more natural. My second piece of advice is to learn your principal parts. Whenever you're revising your vocabulary and going over, just make sure that you don't just learn duco, you learn duco, ducere, duxi, ductus. And you might think this seems really, really difficult, but actually, take a look at something like duco, ducere, duxi, ductus, to lead, and you realise that from ductus, the last principal part, we get conductor. Or look at mitto, mittere, misi, missus, to send, and realise from missus, we get mission. Your fourth principal part isn't the enemy. In fact, it often gives us many words we already know from English. And my third and final piece of advice is to be mindful of other uses of participles. Some of the participles we've discussed today are used in forming other tenses. So do check that they're working in isolation. They're not working to form, let's say, a complex infinitive or a passive tense, and that you have established that before you begin translating the sentence. Alright, I hope that was helpful and you feel more confident with Latin participles now. Thank you. Valete.